Well, I have, do we have Dr. Guinan? I haven't seen him yet.
Yeah, Pat's on.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm here.
Thanks for joining us, Pat. Really appreciate having you here.
You bet.
Always. Always good to hear is Pat Guinan, the weatherman.
That's right. That's right.
Yes, it is.
All righty, my colleagues. Let's go ahead and Wesley, you want to let everybody in, and I'll
Wesley,
I'll get us kicked off.
before you click them all in, let me just tell you, I can't hear you hardly at all. It sounds like you're in a barrel, just so you know.
Thanks for telling me.
Okay.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for our Forage Livestock Town Hall. We moved to 7 p.m. to accommodate some schedules, and my name is Eric Bailey. I'm a state beef nutrition specialist with MU Extension. I'll be hosting the meeting tonight. Wesley Tucker is my co-host. He has changed his name to Ask Questions Here. If at any point any of the information presented for you tonight sparks an interest or a question, go ahead and type it in the chat. You can send it to the whole group if you would like, and if not, feel free to select Ask Questions Here, and that message will be relayed, or that question will be relayed directly to them, and they will relay it to the broader group to make it anonymous. We have been doing these town halls for basically as long as the pandemic is around, and we really appreciate all of the support and attendance that we've had over the years. We've put together roughly 61 YouTube videos now at this point. If you go to the MU IPM YouTube page, which if you just type in MU IPM at the top in the search bar on youtube.com, it'll take you to our page. You can see the videos that we've produced. You can see some of our other town halls, horticulture, one that jumps to mind that has also produced a large number of videos. If you would go check those videos out, like them, subscribe to the channel, help us continue to boost our reach there as well. We're also simulcasting this presentation tonight on YouTube, so that if anybody isn't able to join us live or has to duck out early, wants to hear a piece of the information that they missed, you can actually go to YouTube and you'll be able to find this video after we're done. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started tonight. Well, there's my reminder about the MU IPM YouTube channel. I already mentioned it, so we'll go ahead and move on. We're going to start off tonight with a weather outlook or weather report from Dr. Pat Guinan. Dr. Guinan, are you ready to share?
I am. Thank you, Eric. And good evening, everyone. Well, 1 month later, and wow, December was just anything short of amazing. And, the numbers reflect that. On the upper left, let's go back 127 years, all the way back to 1895. This is every December. Back to 1895, and then the upper right here, where my arrow is, we witnessed the December that we have never seen for this period of record. It was the warmest December on record. Amazing, and only just 6 years ago, 2015 was the prior record. So we have seen some very mild Decembers over the past few decades. On the upper right, looking at Missouri up close, these are departure from normals. Again, look at these, just incredible departures. This is the statewide average, 44.6 degrees, 11.6 degrees above average. Anytime you have a double digit departure above or below normal, you're in record territory. And indeed, that was the case. So we just witnessed something we haven't seen in 127 years. So unbelievable. And there really was no snow to fall during these very mild days, but it's just an incredible month or wintertime start for December. Again, unprecedented warmth. Lower left is precipitation for the month of December, much more seasonable, slightly below average. Again, these are all the Decembers back to 1895. Again, 6 years ago, We had our wettest December on record. That wasn't the case, obviously, this year. A little bit more drier across the state. The lower right is the radar estimates for the month of December. Totals increased as you worked your way from northwest to southeast. That's very classic, somewhat of a climatological expectation for precipitation during the winter time. Heaviest precip does typically fall across southern southeastern portions of Missouri, and that was the case in December. Again, the statewide average is 2.2 inches, a little bit below average, but most of that rain really fell over about the southeastern half of the state, and much wetter conditions as you go into, generally south and east of I-44, where some totals exceeded 5 to over 6 inches in parts of southeast Missouri, southern sections. And so any sort of dryness that was witnessed in that part of the state has pretty much evaporated because of these wetter conditions. And that's very typical. It's a good time of year in the wintertime. If you are in a precipitation deficit, you have pretty good chances you're going to make up that deficit and bring those surface water supplies back to capacity, especially over southern and southeastern parts of Missouri. And that has been the case so far this winter. For the year, well, December wrapped up when this is 2021 in the upper left from 1895 through 2021. Again, this is the trend we've seen over the past few decades. We've only had 4 years over the past 23 years that were below average in the temperature category, and this was no exception. You can see 2021 above average for the year. Upper right shows from January through December, those departure from normals. The pinks indicate 8 months above average, 4 months below average. Of course, we had that really cold spell in February of last year, but overall, it's those warm months that have really leaned towards that above normal year. And again, that has been the trend. That's the direction we're going in with these warmer years, and also wetter. Lower left shows the precipitation for 2021 was slightly above average, about 3.5 inches above average for the state as a whole. On the right, lower right, you can see departure from normals. Very wet during the first and middle part of the growing season from March through July. We had 8 months or 7 months above average, 5 below. A little bit drier conditions as we went into late summer and fall. We had some nice wetness in October. That was really great for some renewed grass growth. We had warm conditions, and that helped get those pastures green again and growing with the wetter conditions in October. So very nice to see that wet condition in October. We are in January. It's January 11th, and it's not surprising to see these roller coaster type of patterns. We had very mild, unprecedented warmth in December, much more cooler, below average conditions during the first 11 days of the month. You can see how cool they've been, anywhere from 2 to 3 degrees below normal across the south to more than 9 degrees below normal across northern parts of the state. Some more systems, again, pretty much going with climatology, wetter conditions as you go southeastward to the state. And so no real drought situation to speak of or any abnormal dryness across southern and southeastern parts of Missouri, with a couple systems during the New Year's and on, and just a few days ago, bringing more wetter conditions across southeastern Missouri. The drought condition of a month ago, you can see how that's transitioned to a little bit more of some abnormal dryness still in parts of northern, west central Missouri, but generally southern parts of the state are pretty much drought free. We are in a situation where some nice weather today. It's been our warmest day of the year so far, with many areas getting into the 50s. Another carbon copy day for tomorrow, a little bit cooler across northern Missouri, highs in the mid 40s, but getting into the middle to upper 50s across central and southern sections tomorrow. Again, that's well above average for this time of year, which is climatologically our coldest time of year. Tomorrow, or on Thursday, it looks like another good day with a little bit cooler up in northern Missouri, but still above average and still reaching the 50s over central and southern Missouri. I think what we need to keep an eye on is a system that'll be moving in from the north and northwest on Friday night and Saturday especially. There are some chances of perhaps our biggest snowfall for the winter season so far taking place on Friday night and into Saturday morning, and then temperatures rebounding back up again with better conditions on Sunday. Again, we'll need to keep an eye on over the next couple of days on this system that is going to impact us on Friday, depending on that track of the low when it moves in south and east. Depending on that track is going to determine the heavier snow track. And right now it's kind of up in the air on what part of Missouri is going to see that heavier snow, but it will be a northwest to southeast band across in the state somewhere as we go into Friday night and Saturday morning. This is the forecast over the next 5 days, which pretty much captures that event on Friday night into Saturday. You can see all the way from the Dakotas to Arkansas, anywhere from a quarter, even a little pocket of heavier precip of a ½ inch. You know, that could easily translate to 2 to 4 to 6 inches of snow, depending on the water content of the snow. But it does look like Missouri is under the gun somewhere for some significant snowfall as we go into Friday night and Saturday morning. The forecast for next week does indicate Missouri is kind of either depending on the direction you go, we're going to be sort of a transition zone with cooler conditions to our north and east, warmer to the west. Above normal temperatures is anticipated generally for the western third of Missouri and on westward to the Pacific coast, and then near normal to below average conditions across the eastern 2/3 of Missouri, as well as much of the eastern U.S. Climatologically, our highs this time of year are generally in the mid to upper 30s, lows in the upper teens and lower 20s. Precip on the right for next week does look like perhaps a couple chances of some no major winter storm or major precipitation event. There might be a system or two that could bring us some lighter precip, but I think the big story will be this potential snow event that we will be seeing on Friday night and into Saturday morning. Eric, that's pretty much a weather report. I'll hand it back over to you, and thank you so much.
Dr. Guinan, thank you very much. Appreciate you being with us tonight. All righty. Are there any questions for Dr. Guinan from the audience? Well, hearing none, we'll go ahead and move on into the educational piece of tonight's presentation. So Dr. Craig Roberts, State Forage Specialist with the University of Missouri Extension, is going to be taking control of the screen now, and he is going to be providing our educational topic tonight on the frost seeding of legumes into tall fescue pastures. So Dr. Roberts, take it away.
Okay, I'm ready, but I'm getting I need permission to share. Oh, thank you. All right, thank you. Right, would say that this talk or a very similar talk was given last year about this time, January the 14th. And it's the time of year that we need to be reminded and go through some of the details in regard to frost seeding legumes. And this talk will, we're going to primarily address 4 topics, and that is why interseeding legumes is so important in 2022. We have an unusual situation this year. Also, we want to remind ourselves how to frost seed and which legumes to frost seed, what is the seeding rate, and we want to talk some about spring management after frost seeding. As we said earlier, 2022 is different, and it's because a lot of the fertilizers, not just nitrogen, but phosphorus and potassium, the fertilizer costs have tripled. This is a slide that was copied from Progressive Farmer. The source is Russ Quinn, Progressive Farmer DTN. But you can see here the monthly increase, and then all of a sudden from October to December, we ended up with nitrogen prices that are 3 times higher than they would have been in the 2 previous years, 2020 and 2019. So this is the value of anhydrous just 2 weeks ago, or even less. We can see that given the high cost of nitrogen fertilizer, we might be able to find alternative sources. And one of those sources would be nitrogen fixed biologically by legumes. Now, this is a chart that was compiled from 2 papers, and there's several points to make. And the first one is that nitrogen fixation, the amount of nitrogen fixed, varies with species. Alfalfa will fix this much and even more at times. Trefoil like this. Our big legumes that we use in frost seeding are really red clover, white clover, and annual aspidisas. Those are the big 3 for frost seeding in Missouri. Want to point out that these are very low numbers. We can find papers that show white clover fixes 3 times that amount of nitrogen. So that's the first thing, is that the species all vary and the amount of nitrogen that they fix. Then we see within a species all of this variation. For alfalfa, for example, a range of 71 pounds per acre per year up to 223, and it can go higher. The reason for the variation is because of the environment, as you would expect. If we have a lot of nitrogen in the soil or nitrogen is applied, that will compete with the biological nitrogen. So the legumes won't fix as much. Also, we could have low pH soils where the rhizoctonia are not alive, but all kinds of variation. The point here is that we do get quite a bit of nitrogen fixed, and it's nearly what we consider nearly free fertilizer. We always, this time of year, talk, mid-January, we always talk about frost seeding legumes. But this year, because of these costs, I think it's worth spending extra time on. One of the points also to make is even though white clover might fix 300 pounds, only 10 to 30% of that nitrogen may be taken up by the grass plants, and those are the plants in proximity. This is a paper from Tim Taylor. It's an old paper from University of Kentucky, and it shows that legume nitrogen can replace purchased fertilizer. And in this example, this would have been the optimum conditions. I don't remember how much red clover was in the pasture. It would have been certainly 20% or more. But we can see that tall fescue with red clover yielded 1,100 pounds per acre. That's a 2-year average. 1,100 pounds, pretty good. And then tall fescue with in fertilizer, less. Now that's not going to be repeated most of the time, but this just shows the potential of essentially free nitrogen fertilizer. We want to remind ourselves also about the other reasons that we interseed legumes, and one of the major reasons is yield. We can see that this is the typical yield curve of tall fescue, our most prominent cool season grass in our pastures. We see about 2/3 of the growth occurs in the spring when the temperature and moisture are ideal, and another 1/3 of the yield is produced in the fall. And that leaves this big summer gap. So annual Lespedeza is what physiologists call a C3 legume, but it behaves like a tropical legume, so that as tall fescue decreases, we don't have that yield. We have that gap in yield filled in by annual Lespedeza. Red and white clover, not so much. Red and white clover is viewed more like a mix. Tall fescue and Lespedeza more like a double crop, but you can see the mixture right here. These are yield curves for red and white clover. And that's important for dilution factors. We'll talk about that here in a minute. Other than yield and nitrogen fixation, one of the reasons that we interseed legumes is for forage quality. They're more nutritional for grazing livestock. Here is a slide from Byron Slough at Iowa State. It's an old study, but it's relevant, and it's representative of many studies. They compared the protein of these two legumes, alfalfa and birdsfoot trefoil, to the protein in smooth brome grass and orchard grass. You see quite a bit more crude protein. That's not surprising. They also reported increases in digestibility. So the legumes bump up the digestibility. You can see birdsfoot trefoil and alfalfa higher than smooth brome grass and orchard grass. For us in Missouri, we're only one state south of Iowa, and people might wonder, why are we not reporting tall fescue? The same thing happens with tall fescue and with ryegrass. The cool season perennials, they're going to be lower in digestibility and lower in protein. Legumes also have higher mineral content for some of those minerals that are essential. Now, this is a very busy slide. This is a study from Lithuania. So we just highlighted some of the relevant bars, we could say. If we look at these legumes here, alfalfa, white clover, red clover, and alsite clover, Look at the calcium concentration there compared to meadow fescue, perennial ryegrass, smooth brome grass, and orchard grass. Coxfoot is orchard grass, actually. And so, yes, quite a bit more calcium. Same thing would hold true with magnesium. The legumes that are pretty common in Missouri have much higher magnesium than these perennial cool season grasses. So thus far, we're showing the reasons as yield, nitrogen fixation, which is important in 2022, and also nutritive value, protein digestibility, and minerals. In the case of red clover has what we might call medicinal attributes. Red clover can reduce vasoconstriction. We show the slide here in a minute, but just as a reminder, when our cows are grazing toxic tall fescue, their blood vessels narrow. The ergot alkaloids that are produced in toxic tall fescue cause the narrowing of the blood vessels. And the reason that's important is because if the blood is not flowing to the extremities this time of year, our cattle can suffer from fescue foot and even hoof loss, and then we'll have to put them down. In the summer, vasoconstriction can prevent blood flow to the extremities and circulation, and we believe that's the reason why animals have a higher heat stress on tall fescue in the summer compared to other forages. Work at the University of Kentucky, it's actually the USDA Animal Unit in Lexington, Kentucky, showed that this small constricted blood vessel can be opened up when red clover is fed, and that's because of this compound here, biochanin A. So it has an impact on animal health when animals are grazing toxic tall fescue. Legumes in general delete the toxic effect of tall fescue, and this is a real pasture in North Missouri. This is at Linnaeus at the experiment station there. And you can see these are pretty common forages for that part of Missouri, tall fescue, smooth brome, and orchard. And these are pretty common legumes. What's important here is the tall fescue in this pasture is infected. The tall fescue in this pasture is toxic. It may contain 70 or 80% endophyte. The reason that's not a problem is the tall fescue itself makes up such a small proportion of that pasture. So the pasture can be diluted, not just with legumes, but legumes are the primary plant species used to dilute tall fescue. I was asked to remind our audience that we also have other legumes that can be planted in the field: alsike, clover, crimson clover, sun hemp, and alfalfa. So that's another reason to have legumes in the pasture. It's more than theoretical. We can demonstrate animal performance improvements when the legumes are added. This is a study from Paul Beck in Arkansas. It was a study where legumes were added to toxic fescue, Kentucky 31, Max Q, and Texoma, Max Q, two novel endophytes. And in every case, what we see is the white clover bumped average daily gain from 0.9 to 1.3, from 2.1 to 2.5, and so on. The average daily gain increased 0.4 of a pound. Now you might say, well, that's way more than I thought I would get. Remember, this is only for the spring grazing, only during the spring, but it still is a significant bump. So impressive. We can see also that when clovers in general, this would be red clover, white clover, are added to tall fescue across many states, we see the same thing. Now, in this case, we have three types of Kentucky 31. We have a low endophyte, in other words, not very toxic Kentucky 31. Then we have a moderately toxic Kentucky 31 and a highly toxic Kentucky 31. And in all cases, when the clovers were added, we see this bump in animal performance. This is, for the researchers on the line, this is a review paper. The report is 17 site years, and the grazing is spring through the summer. So this is pretty reliable data. The clover's proven many, many times to improve animal performance. So it's pretty easy to demonstrate that clovers are beneficial. Annual Espediza, they're easy to seed into the field. That's another reason that people like red and white clover and annual Espediza. Frost seeding is really just going over the frozen ground this time of the year. We can go over it with a handheld whirlybird or attach one of these whirlybirds, basically a whirlybird, to a tractor or four-wheeler. And people like to broadcast in winter and like to broadcast, if possible, on snow. And the reason is when we broadcast, we can broadcast alone or with an extender, but when we broadcast in the winter, when the ground is frozen, here are the benefits. We can see where we spread it. We don't get rutting. And most importantly, for the plants to germinate, we need that seed to get just slightly down into the soil so that as the soil freezes and thaws and freezes and thaws, it sucks that seed down. When we frost seed this time of year, the main thing to watch for is seed to soil contact. We have cases, not just with farmers, but with our graduate students, where some red clover will be spread, will be broadcast onto the pasture. We come back in the next spring, we have no stand. And the reason is that seed is resting on top of all this thatch. If there's a lot of thatch or residue, there's no way for that seed to get into the soil or down even on the soil surface without any kind of mechanical action. What cattlemen do often is if they have a lot of thatch or residue, they just run the cattle over the field. That's what they call hoofing it in. And that works very well. Let's talk briefly about why our forage seedlings fail. This is the Bible of forage textbooks published by authors here in Missouri, Kentucky, Iowa State, Wisconsin, and many of us have chapters in this book. And this book has a chapter on why the seedlings fail. And in general, they fail for a number of reasons. The seed don't germinate in the first place, or if they do germinate, they come up and they die immediately, or they come up and the seedlings are going along well, but they die after they are established. That's pretty much how this chapter is written. We want to talk about why interseeded legumes fail in particular. The live seed may not germinate because we have poor quality seed. We always remember to get the seed with the certified seed, fresh seed with a good seed tag on it. But remember what we said earlier, sometimes it just doesn't come into contact with the soil. Once the seedlings germinate, they can die because of freezing or because of waterlogging. And then after establishment, also waterlogging, drought. But this is a very important factor here. Our seedlings may germinate and they may come up and be, a half-inch tall, but they're just crowded out by the grass canopy. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. Which legumes should we be frost seeding in Missouri, and how much should we seed? Well, this is a guide. It's on the web. We looked at this guide recently. The numbers are still accurate. This was published 15 years ago, and really the seeding rates have not changed at all. And in this guide, these are really the rates that we would like to see. Red and white clover, right here, we sometimes seed those together. Red clover, 4 to 6 pounds. White clover, 1/2 pound to a pound, really. You can go up to 2 pounds if you want to. Annual Espediza, 6 to 8 pounds to the acre. If we want an annual Espediza stand the first year, we need to go on up to 12 or 15 pounds. But we We typically like to seed 6 to 8 pounds because Lespedeza is a prolific reseeder, and just after management of 1 year, we'll have a huge amount of Lespedeza in the field just by letting it reseed naturally. Outside clover, 4 to 6 pounds. These are some numbers collected by Sarah Kenyon, so these numbers are current, and she contacted several of the retailers, and this is a typical cost per pound for these red and white clover annual Lespedeza. The prices vary on the store, the supplier, or the cultivar. If you look at what we're recommending compared to what Minnesota recommends or Wisconsin, you'll see that they recommend bird's foot trefoil or alfalfa. Then they have ladino, which is like a white clover, alsike, red clover. They have some of the same species. We don't recommend frost seeding bird's foot trefoil and alfalfa. And the reason is partly because of our state. If we frost seed alfalfa in this time of year or in early February, it's very possible that we have some warming temperatures and the alfalfa seeds germinate, the seedlings come up, and then the next week we get a sheet of ice. That's some of what Pat Guinan was talking about. You know, it's life on the jet stream. If we were up in Minnesota when growing conditions came and boom, it's warm or it's cold, that's different. Or if we were down south. But here in Missouri, we have such a fluctuation in temperature that we could plant alfalfa with the wrong dormancy class, germinate, come up, sheet of ice, kills it all, and we have no alfalfa. That's very expensive. When we seed alfalfa, we need to grow it for 2 or 3 years just to recover the establishment costs. So no alfalfa for frost seeding. And it's not to say that if you frost seed alfalfa, you won't have a stand, but it's high risk. In the case of bird's foot trefoil, one of our most nutritional legumes, pasture legumes, we don't like to interseed trefoil because it has such poor seedling vigor. It may germinate and just have no strength, you might say, to compare with to compete with the grass canopy. Spring management, just go through this right quick. Remember that if we plant, if we interseed, if we frost seed a legume into the grass pasture, we have to be careful to manage that canopy. And one of the worst things we can do to increase competition for that legume is to fertilize that field with nitrogen. Nitrogen will cause the grass canopy to come up and crowd it. I'm sorry about this slide, it's very busy, but basically these are 2 ways to measure light penetration. And you can see here that if we move the fertilizer from 0 to 50, we have already reduced light penetration. And so we don't want to see that. Nitrogen also, you can see how much it increases grass competition. This is a study from Rob Kallenbach's group. This is 4 years of data, and you can see that in every case, even in year 2, when we had the so-called red clover year, and year 2 is usually a pretty good year to see red clover anyway, but this was an excellent year, and you could see that they counted 100 plants nearly per square meter. But when they fertilized it up to 100 pounds, we've dropped down below 60. So not quite half, but we've reduced almost half of the red clover plants just by fertilizing with nitrogen. That same trend occurred the first year, the third year, the fourth year, even though the red clover plants were much more sparse. So it's very unwise to fertilize the field with nitrogen at any appreciable rate. If we do have to hit the field, maybe 25 pounds would be it. And that's simply because we need some forage to get us out of the winter. Sometimes nitrogen fertilizer and waterlogging work together to kill the legumes. Some of you may remember the flood year 1993, and I was here and I was on the flood response team, and I can remember a lot of extension folks talking about the loss in soybean, the loss in corn, the loss in wheat, 30% losses. And those losses occurred because those plants were grown in the alluvial plains or the flatlands. But we lost a lot of alfalfa and a lot of clover that year as well because we had so much rain. Our producers fertilized those grass legume pastures with nitrogen, thinking they would go in and clip that grass and remove it and have some hay, but they couldn't get on the field. The fields were too wet, waterlogged fields. So what happened is the grass just laid on the legume and smothered it all out. We lost so much legume, hay and grazing legumes that year. Also, we found some of the rhizobia in those pastures died. It was drowned out. So legumes, if we want to grow legumes to support our pastures, and it's a very good idea for those reasons that we stated earlier, we need to not hit that field with nitrogen. Advice from John Laurie, some of you know Dr. Laurie, and his advice is if you're going to have, if you need forage really bad, maybe just put the nitrogen on this pasture and leave it off the rest of those fields, because once that nitrogen goes on, we're going to reduce the amount of nitrogen produced, fixed biologically, and we're going to crowd out the legumes. This shows us that grass competition with legumes varies with the legume species. We're just the same old slide we saw earlier, but we can imagine here how much red and white clover would be smothered out, but not necessarily annual lespedeza. Annual lespedeza is, as we said earlier, more like a double crop. This is a field of freshly cut hay. This is near Tuscumbia, and this is late May. And just looking across that field, we would say, well, that's a tall fescue field. I've cut many of those fields myself, and that's what it looks like. But if we hold the camera right over the field and look straight down, what we see is all this buried, all this newly emerged annual lespedeza. And so as the summer comes on, that lespedeza would dominate that field. So we don't get as much smothering with annual lespedeza as we do red and white clover. One other thing to remember is if we interseed legumes, red and white clover, annual lespedeza, what we're talking about here for frost seeding, if we do that and then we hit that field with nitrogen, it isn't just that we hurt the legumes by grass competition. That's true. We can hurt the legume percentage. We also reduce the amount of nitrogen fixed. The plant can sense that, and so we don't have nodule production. I apologize for the blurry slide, and I apologize even more for showing you a soybean slide. But this is a really nice slide, and a lot of the work done here is by Streeter from Ohio State, and it really demonstrates what we're talking about. This is a pot study, but you can see that if we fertilize those plants with nitrogen, nitrates, which is the form taken up by the plant, if we hit that field, as that nitrogen rate increases, look at B, the infixation decreases. In other words, if I fertilize the field with nitrogen fertilizer, the amount of nitrogen fixed by the legume decreases sharply. And that's one of the reasons I put the legumes in there in the first place. Then we see here also, these are just measurements of nodules. If I fertilize the field with nitrogen, the amount of nodules decreases, and even the size of the nodules decreases. So over and over, we're seeing the same response and coming up with the same recommendation. Don't hit that field with nitrogen fertilizer. So let's summarize what we're talking about. Again, this talk is really repackaged for the 2022 year. And so why do we add legumes? It's because we're adding nitrogen to the soil. It's essentially free fertilizer and lots of it at times. So we're fertilizing the grass. We even out the yield distribution. We may have plenty of yield with our tall fescue, but it doesn't come evenly. So we need to spread out the yield in the summer in particular. We increase forage quality. We lower toxicosis in the animals, and we improve the animal performance. broadcast in late winter, January possibly in the Ozarks, February maybe in North Missouri. Consider these three as the top three legumes we would want to see interseeded in Missouri. Use Mizzou seeding rates. Some of the seeding rates for white clover approach 3 and even more than 3 pounds to the acre. You don't need that in Missouri. If you can't get a stand with 1 pound, you're not going to get a stand with 3 pounds. And it's expensive to triple the seeding rate for white clover. Make sure that you have good seed soil contact, or all the other stuff doesn't matter. Don't add very much nitrogen in the spring. I like John Lorry's suggestion. Maybe fertilize pasture by pasture, depending on how much legume you want in that field. And then also manage the canopy. Those are the important things. And Eric, I'll turn it back to you here.
Craig, thank you very much for joining us tonight. That was a lot of excellent information. Wesley, are there any questions in the chat for Craig?
I haven't received any yet, Eric.
Okay. So Craig, just a bit of a selfish question here. What pushes producers towards selecting, a red or white clover over an annual Espadiza? Is what has been the thought process there over the years in terms of pushing them in that direction?
I think that producers are more familiar with red and white clover, and there's been a lot more push from industry. Also, many of the breeders, for example, the breeder in Georgia, Joe Boughton, a very well-known breeder who released Alpha Grays and the grazing type alfalfas. Joe is the one who released Patriot and Durana white clover. Taylor at the University of Kentucky was red clover breeder. So a lot of this is marketing and researchers' emphasis. I would say that the annual Espadiza is a different forage, and so I would hope that people would consider a blend. The annual Espadiza is what we call the poor man's alfalfa. It grows well when the pH is 5.5, and so, but I do believe, to answer your question, it's primarily what people are talking about more than what is needed.
Do I have it right in stating that the growth curve of the clovers matches more closely the tall fescue, whereas the annual Espadiza is more of a complementary summer forage? I know you made that statement, but is there enough of a distinction between the growth pattern of the clover and the Espadiza to go there?
Absolutely. I mean, they're way different. And so if someone plants annual Espadiza, they're doing that to get summer forage, summer grazing. That's the reason they're doing it. Red and white clover is what we call a true mixture. And so it grows alongside the tall fescue. So yeah, I think of annual Espadiza tall fescue again, more like double cropping. You're getting either or. Now there is that little window in May where you have sort of the blend, but normally you're getting Espadiza or tall fescue. Let me say one other thing about this that I didn't say. Annual Espadiza is non-bloating, so there's no risk to animal health on that.
Wesley, I don't want to hog up all of the question times. Has anything come in?
Oh, I think we're good, Eric.
Okay. Well, I don't necessarily want to keep everybody here just while I struggle to think of questions to ask Dr. Roberts. I'm so glad that we're able to have his expertise and experience, available to us tonight to really talk about this. I'll reemphasize his points that, if we're accustomed to using nitrogen fertilizer on our pastures, there's some significant economic reasons to put a pencil to that this year and see if it makes sense. And, quite honestly, what he's presented this evening are some really relevant and potentially viable alternatives. So Dr. Roberts, thank you for being here tonight. I'm just going to go ahead and wrap us up for tonight. I'm glad everybody was here. I'm glad we got to get together. We really appreciate your time and your interest. And, if you've got somebody that couldn't join us tonight, but is interested in the content, send them to our MUIPM YouTube page. And this video will be posted up there. And, if you enjoy the content, give the video a like and subscribe to the MUIPM channel. We'd sure appreciate it. So with that, I'm going to call it a night, and we'll be back on January 25th for a talk more specifically about nitrogen fertilizers. So thanks again. Have a good night, everyone.
Maybe you could